This episode will be completely taken out of context. Welcome to the Fact Check This podcast.
All right, Fact Check This podcast. And I said I was going to talk about an article about the... Hang on. Give me just a second. Much better. All right. So I said I was going to talk about an article that from the Washington Post that discusses the double standard that Kamala Harris is being held to by the media. Interestingly enough, since I originally said that I was going to do that, Jeff Bezos wrote a interesting piece in the Washington Post talking about why he chose not to give a presidential endorsement from the newspaper, and also talked about how the public's trust in the news media has really fallen off. The people just straight up don't trust the things that they hear and see from the news, especially the news like the Washington Post and other similar platforms. So that was pretty interesting. I highly recommend checking that out, giving it a read. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Let's talk about the double standard that Kamala Harris is supposedly being held to. The double standard for Harris and Trump has reached a breaking point. One candidate can rant about gibberish while the other has to be perfect. And the funny thing is, if you didn't know the direction that this article is going to go because it's from the Washington Post, you might think that it's actually the opposite of what they're going to say. One candidate literally just spews gibberish nonstop 100% of the time, while the other one gets fact-checked and nitpicked on every little thing he says every turn of the way and is expected to be absolutely perfect. But as far as this writer for the WAPO thinks, it's the roles are actually reversed. Something is wrong with this split-screen picture. On one side, former President Donald Trump rants about mass deportations and claims to have stopped wars with France, after being described by his long-serving White House chief of staff as a literal fascist. On the other side, commentators debate whether Vice President Kamala Harris performed well enough at a CNN town hall to close the deal. Seriously? Much of a double standard here? You're talking about Donald Trump being a literal fascist, and you don't see the double standard. Somehow it is apparently baked into this campaign that Trump is allowed to talk and act like a complete lunatic, while Harris has to be perfect in every way. I don't know the answer to the chicken or egg question, whether media coverage is leading public perception or vice versa, but the disparate treatment is glaring. MSNBC literally won't play clips of Donald Trump talking because they say all he does is lie. They say all he does is stir up all of this like violent rhetoric and stuff. Whereas Kamala Harris just spews nonsense for 3 minutes straight, and they'll put that as the headliner. You don't see the double standard? This week, it became simply ridiculous. Retired Marine Corps General John F. Kelly, who served as Trump's Homeland Security Secretary for 6 months, then as his White House Chief of Staff for a year and a half, said in an extended interview with the New York Times that Trump certainly falls into the general definition of fascist for sure. The Kelly departure was very enigmatic. It was very like a lot of the departures from Trump's administration. Once he figured out who the neocons, who the swamp creatures were, and started to weed them out, then they turned on him. And Kelly is no different from all the other ones. The people who have come out in support of Kamala Harris and to talk bad about Donald Trump from the previous Trump administration, when you look at these people's backgrounds and who they are and what they've done and how they've made their careers, like getting their endorsement should not be viewed as a net positive. But you can't tell that to the Washington Post or any other mainstream media outlet. This followed a similar shocking assessment by retired Army General Mark Milley, who was chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff for the final 16 months of Trump's presidency. Milley is quoted in Bob Woodward's latest book, War, as saying that Trump is fascist to the core and the most dangerous person to this country. It's important to remember when you see all these generals who are saying this, they're saying all of this after Trump refused to keep going to war and actively fought to get us out of wars and to stop us from being in wars. Like the people who made their careers off of being fucking warmongers now say Trump is a fascist after he wouldn't let them continue to be warmongers. Keep that in mind as well. It's hard to overstate how extraordinary this is. Two of the nation's most honored and respected warriors, both of whom worked closely with Trump for extended periods, warned the nation about the grave danger of returning him to the White House. Respecting the tradition of keeping the armed forces out of partisan politics, neither Kelly nor Milley went so far as to explicitly endorse Harris, but they clearly intended their remarks to be understood by those who might vote for Trump as flashing red lights and blaring sirens. The Times published audio of the Kelly interview in which he describes how Trump commented more than once, Hitler did some good things too. In a separate interview with The Atlantic, Kelly recalled Trump telling him that he wanted obedient generals like Hitler's generals. Trump certainly prefers the dictator approach to government, Kelly told The Times. During Wednesday's town hall, CNN's Anderson Cooper asked Harris whether she believes Trump is a fascist. Yes, I do, she replied. And that was the headline from the event. But news stories and commentary also questioned her decision to pivot from questions about specific policy positions, almost all of which she has already spelled out in considerable detail. When and where. She hasn't actually given considerable detail to anything other than detailing the fact that she grew up in a middle-class family and she wants to be unburdened, become all that you can be while being unburdened by what has been, or I don't know I can't remember the line. She hasn't actually spelled out anything. The only considerable detail she's gone into is literal minutes upon minutes worth of just rambling nonsense. But who am I to judge? I literally do minutes and minutes of rambling nonsense myself. To attacks on Trump and warnings about the danger he poses to our democracy. Let's review. First, Harris was criticized for not doing enough interviews. So she did multiple interviews, including with non-traditional media. She was criticized for not doing hostile interviews, so she went toe-to-toe with Bret Baier of Fox News. She was criticized as being comfortable only when at scripted rallies, so she did unscripted events, such as the town hall on Wednesday. The town hall on Wednesday was in no way an unscripted event. She has yet to do an unscripted event. Every event, all of the questions have been predetermined, and her answers have already been given to her. We even have literal video of a town hall that she did where it was supposed to be like off script. And as they pan to show the crowd, you see the teleprompter that has her fucking answer on it. She does not do anything unscripted. It's the reason she wouldn't go on Rogan, or that they put these stipulations on. If she was going to go on Rogan, Rogan had to come to her. It could only be an hour. There were other stipulations that were being put on it. Like it wasn't going to be a unscripted sit-down conversation with Rogan. It was going to be the exact same thing she's done in every fucking interview that she's had. Interview. Along the way, she wiped the floor with Trump during their one televised debate. I'm almost positive this dude is actually retarded. If you anybody that took away Kamala Harris wiped the floor with Trump in that debate was watching something completely different, or is looking at it through such a Kamala colored glasses that you are divorced from reality. Trump, meanwhile, stands before his MAGA crowds and spews nonstop lies, ominous threats, impossible promises, and utter gibberish. His rhetoric is dismissed or looked past without first being interrogated. Literally all mainstream media does, day in and day out, is interrogate and dig into everything that Trump says, every word that comes out of his mouth, every little exaggeration, everything that they don't think is right. They fact checked the fucking Joe Rogan interview. Like, is this guy is actually a retard? Like, I don't know how you get any of this from all that we've seen. Imagine if Harris were promising to end the war in Gaza on her first day in office, but wouldn't say how. Imagine if she were proposing a tariffs-based economic plan that economists say would destabilize the world economy and cost the average family $4,000 a year, higher prices. We're not going into that. Imagine if she were promising a bloody campaign to uproot and deport millions of undocumented migrants who were gainfully employed and paying taxes. Imagine if Harris were vowing to use the military to go after her political opponents, as Trump repeatedly pledges. Trump has literally never at any point said that he's going to use the military to go after his political opponents. This is all nonsense gibberish that you dumb motherfuckers in the mainstream media make up. This is why Jeff Bezos writes an article that says people don't trust you and people don't believe you because you continually say shit like this. Kelly and Milley are hardly the only career servicemen to sound the alarm about the potential second Trump term. Two of Trump's defense secretaries, Marine Corps General Jim Mattis and Army Lieutenant Colonel Mark T. Esper, and one of his national security advisors, Army Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, have also warned about Trump's erratic performance as commander-in-chief. Again, I point to all of the dudes who made a career out of being war hawks, out of being absolutely warmongering scum, and dragging our military across the planet while pumping trillions of dollars into the military-industrial complex. Don't like Trump because Trump has been the most anti-war president that we've had probably in any of our lifetimes. And he continues to push that he's going to get us out of and not have any more and help to prevent and end the current wars that are going on. So yeah, obviously, all of the generals who that's their entire life's work, they don't like him. Gosh, I wonder why. It's their fucking bread and butter that he's talking about just putting an end to. They join a long list of civilians who worked in the Trump administration and say there should never be another one. Never has there been such a chorus of officials who served a president telling the nation that under no circumstances should he be elected. Oops, there I go again, dwelling on the existential peril we face. Instead, let's parse every detail of every position Harris takes today against every detail of every position she took 5 years ago, and then let's wonder why she hasn't already put this election away. Literally nobody's doing that. There is absolutely nobody who's in the mainstream media who's doing that at all, not even a little bit. They're not parsing every detail of anything Kamala Harris says ever. In fact, more often than not, they're glossing over it, blowing past it, and trying to ignore it because mostly it's retarded gibberish. And you want to talk about the long list of people who worked in somebody's administration? Should we talk about the fact that Kamala Harris's entire fucking staff turned over 4 times over the course of two and a half months? That she still doesn't have, like, she still has had incredibly terrible turnover problems since that couple month period. Should we talk about the fact that the corporate press was openly discussing whether or not and how Joe Biden could and should go about picking a different running mate to be his vice presidential candidate for the 2024 election? Like, I don't know, 2 months before he ended up stepping down. He stepped down. Yeah. Yeah. Double standard. That double fucking standard. Let's talk about that double standard. Time magazine does a what would this person be like as president? And they had already done these for Trump and Biden a few months ago, actually back like earlier in the year, in April, May, somewhere in that general time frame. Well, now with Kamala Harris being the only candidate that the Democratic Party allowed to be their candidate for this election, Time Magazine put out a similar article about what kind of a president would Kamala Harris be. And the original title for this, so this is an edited title. The original title for this was "What's Actually in Kamala Harris's Policy Platform," except that. Well, let's read the article. Let's find out what's actually in Kamala Harris's policy platform and what kind of a president Kamala Harris would be. And this is all going to tie back into the double standard thing, so just bear with me for a few minutes while we read. On a Sunday, Wednesday in late September, Vice President Kamala Harris took the stage at Carnegie Mellon University for the first comprehensive economic policy speech for her short presidential campaign. Addressing a sedate audience in suits and ties, the vice president outlined plans to strengthen small businesses, cut taxes on the middle class, and build more affordable housing. "I'm a capitalist," she told the Pittsburgh crowd, detailing how she would invest in startups and increase public-private partnerships, and describing an approach to economic growth that stressed stability. All of the talking points that came straight from Donald Trump's plan that he's been running on for the last year and a half. That's part of her plan now as well. It was a business-friendly speech tailored to business-friendly voters. But in a neck-and-neck presidential race, wonky pitches like these could make the difference. In a September New York Times Siena poll, nearly 30% of likely voters said they felt the need to learn more about the vice president before making their choice. Gosh, in the September poll, I wonder how those 30% feel now that they've had an opportunity to learn more about the vice president. The fight to define Kamala Harris, who she is, what she stands for, and what kind of president she would be, will be one of the central battles in the campaign's final weeks. To examine these questions, Time spoke with 20 current and former Harris campaign advisors, former aides in her vice presidential and Senate offices, senior officials from each of the past 5 presidential administrations, and a range of policy experts. The portrait that emerged was of a politician who is more practical than ideological, a cautious candidate running in a change election. A change election. They're still going with the change, even though Biden and Harris have been in office for 3.5 years. But this is the change. Juggling the liabilities and benefits of her ties to her boss, President Joe Biden, as well as her own past positions, all while trying to keep the focus on her opponent. For Harris, policy specifics are in service to a larger goal of her campaign, which is to present a credible alternative to a second Donald Trump presidency. At Carnegie Mellon, Harris offered the most detailed look at her economic plans since taking over as the Democratic nominee. She's proposing a $50,000 tax deduction to help Americans start more small businesses, and a $6,000 child tax credit for families in the first year of the baby's life. She plans to extend $35 insulin to all Americans and eliminate degree requirements for 500,000 federal jobs, because what we need is even more ignorant people in federal jobs. That's brilliant. Absolutely fucking brilliant. She wants to invest in research and development in new manufacturing industries and trim red tape to further the Biden administration's overhaul of American infrastructure. Trim red tape. Reducing regulation is what that means. That's literally straight out of Donald Trump's plan. And if you acknowledge that reducing regulation build things up and make things better for everybody, then why did the Biden presidency undo a lot of those lifting of regulations that Trump had put in place during his first administration. Why did the Biden administration do away with the tax cuts and the child tax credits and all the other stuff? Like, why did you do all of this stuff right off the bat? And now, 3.5 years later, you're saying you're going to do all of this stuff that was already part of the Trump plan to begin with? You fucking morons. She plans to offer $25,000 in down payment assistance to first-time homebuyers, a tax credit to incentivize builders, and pledges to build 3 million affordable housing units in her first term. Didn't this other guy talk about Trump just talking about rhetoric and not actually offering any plans for how stuff is going to be done? Like, she says they're going to do all of these things, but there's no actual plan for how this realistically works, or how to implement all of it, or what the cost is going to be, how much we're going to end up paying for this in taxes, like the rest of us who are paying taxes. You can imagine the Harris presidency as an iOS upgrade of the current administration. The current administration crashed and burned, and everybody threw it out a long time ago. So, like, upgrade. Like, I say, like, you know, I say it regularly. The bar was set pretty low. Like, they put the bar on the floor. All you had to do was not trip over it. And like Joe Biden doing public appearances and speeches and interviews and stuff. Like, the bar was already set pretty low. Like, all you had to do was not trip over it. And Kamala Harris walked right into that motherfucker and fell flat on her face as soon as she started doing interviews and stuff. Like, how do we expect a Biden or a Harris presidency is going to be an upgrade over a Biden presidency? Like, at least Biden they were able to, you know, put him to bed at 4 o'clock and then do business for the rest of the day while he was asleep. You know, take him out for ice cream and keep him distracted while they actually, like, handle things. Like, Kamala Harris probably going to be more hands-on. And as we've seen from her interviews, the more she talks, the more ignorant she becomes. The operating system would stay the same, but with new features and better packaging. There are tonal differences between the two. Harris talks more and more comfortably about abortion rights than Biden ever did, speaks with more empathy about the suffering of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and has put housing and small businesses at the center of her plan for strengthening the middle class. But for the most part, allies and critics agree, there is little evident policy daylight between the Democratic nominee and the president she replaced at the top of the party's ticket this summer. The sharper contrast is between Harris's current positions and her previous ones. If you talk to Harris's advisors, the word that frequently comes up is pragmatic. But the candidate who campaigned for president in 2020 Democratic primary was part of the party's leftward lurch. Back then, Harris supported a public health care option and a Green New Deal. She wanted to ban fracking, decriminalize unauthorized border crossings, and cut funding for immigrant detention. She backed forcing owners of assault weapons to sell them to the government. She has since changed her stance on all of these issues. Every single one, because all of those were wildly unpopular, or are wildly unpopular in 2024. So now she's not for any of that stuff anymore. Some voters see these shifts as part of a predictable pivot to the center. Others see them as flip-flops in need of an explanation. Outside the auditorium at Carnegie Mellon, Rodrigo Lopez, a registered independent from Florida, was finishing up homework for his mechanical engineering class. Lopez followed the 2020 primary closely and recalled that Harris took left-wing positions he disliked. He said he would never vote for Trump, but he doesn't feel he knows enough about Harris to cast a ballot for her either. It's hard to tell what her real policy intentions are, he says. Harris could win my vote, Lopez adds, if she articulates the reasons she's changing some of her stances. Harris is hardly the first presidential candidate to change her positions. Trump has flipped on everything from abortion to gun control to Social Security. When asked on 60 Minutes about her shifts since 2020, she said her time as vice president has included a lot of listening and consensus building. Forging compromise is not a bad thing, she said, as long as you don't compromise your values. What she means, according to her aides, is that her goals remain the same: affordable health care, a strong middle class, but she is flexible about how to achieve them. Yet she has skirted the thorough accounting of her policy evolution that Lopez is seeking, in part by speaking infrequently to reporters. When she does do interviews, she mostly favors local media, culture podcasts, or friendly talk shows. Harris declined repeated requests for an interview for this story. Again, this is where the double standard that we were talking about comes in. Harris declined repeated requests for an interview for this story. Harris declines repeated requests for interviews for a lot of things. They're very, very controlled about where she goes and who she talks to and how she does it. In contrast, Trump talked about his policy vision with a Time reporter for 90 minutes across 2 interviews. Biden spoke to Time at similar length before dropping out of the race. I actually have the Trump interview. I've got the full transcript of the Trump interview. Full transcript, another one of those things that you don't get from Kamala Harris interviews very often. But I've got the full transcript from Donald Trump's interviews with Time. I've read most of it. It's like I said, it was a 90-minute conversation. It is a fairly long read, but I mean, he does a pretty good job of answering questions and being very straightforward. Another strange and interesting thing about this is just the transcript. Like it's just like straight up what he says. It's not the it doesn't have any of the opinion part of it. And I do have that, and I may read that later. I don't know. Election's coming up on Tuesday, and it kind of seems pointless to read that after the election is over. But for an interesting contrast, the title of this article was "What kind of president would Kamala Harris be?" Whereas the title for the Trump article is, hang on, let me pull it up so you can see it. How far Trump would go. If that's not ominous, I don't know, like just the wording of it, how far Trump would go. It's pretty impressive that they, like, you get an idea of how far the Time magazine will go just based on the headline itself. Oh, picking back up where we left off. Harris is running on what she won't do as much as what she would. She won't curb abortion rights, as Republicans want to, which is not entirely accurate. She won't impose Trump's blanket tariffs, which most economists believe would raise prices and could throw the country into a recession. Hers are more narrowly targeted. So the Trump's is a blanket. Everything gets a tariff, except that he's actually pointed to the specific things and how he would go about doing it. But it's just a blanket. Everything gets a tariff, and it's going to jack prices up. Whereas Kamala Harris is much more targeted. She would only put tariffs on certain things, and it wouldn't be as bad, even though that's like literally Trump's plan as well. She won't initiate the mass deportation of undocumented migrants, as Trump promises, or fire legions of civil servants and replace them with MAGA loyalists. Trump has not said that he will fire legions of civil servants and replace them with MAGA loyalists. And also, Kamala literally just yesterday said that if people are here illegally, they're going to do everything they can to get them out. So sounds like initiating mass deportations. It's just what it sounds like to me. I don't know. She won't attempt to overturn the results of a free and fair election as Trump did, which literally didn't happen. Fucking Time magazine. Once upon a time, presidential candidates compared health care plans or tax policies when competing for votes. These days, a policy-heavy campaign can weigh you down. Elizabeth Warren's "I have a plan for that" campaign sputtered through the 2020 primary, failing to win a single state. She lost the nomination to Biden, whose campaign was about restoring the soul of the nation, whatever that was supposed to mean. Airy promises of hope and change worked for Barack Obama, whereas Hillary Clinton's economic white papers did not. Trump's own campaign is constructed around a set of one-liners. He acknowledged in his recent debate with Harris that he only had concepts of a plan for overhauling the American healthcare system. None of that has cost him an iota of support. Instead of policy, many voters are making their decisions based on tribal allegiances or vibes, which is one reason Harris's approach may be a winning strategy. For many, the fact that she is not Trump is reason enough to vote for her. Running against MAGA has boosted Democrats to victory in scores of elections since 2016, whether those candidates had well-defined policies or not. She knows that very few people are going to choose between her and Donald Trump based on some detail of economic strategy or some full-fledged proposal, so she's not presenting them, says David Wessel, Director of Fiscal and Monetary Policy at the Brookings Institution, a nonpartisan think tank. Yeah, Brookings is a nonpartisan think tank. Sure. It's a strategy to win the election. What reason is there to put out a detailed economic plan if your opponent is just throwing snowballs? When somebody joins the vice president's staff, Harris often asks them to think of a wedding album. Imagine you've been to somebody's wedding, she says, and you go to their home and you see their photo album. When you start flipping through it, what are you looking for? The question is rhetorical. You're looking for yourself because you want to see if you're in their vision of what their day was, recalls Roni Kosoglu. Say that 5 times fast. Harris's former domestic policy advisor. That's how the American people feel when they're listening to us talk. Are they in our vision when we see the future of our country? This approach, more than any ideology or economic theory, animates Harris's style of governance. How does policy feel to the people who are experiencing it? One aide recalls a conversation about transportation infrastructure in which the vice president asked how the outcome would work for a mother pushing her stroller down the street. Another ally recalls how, after hearing small business owners tick off the burdens of paperwork, Harris worked to automate the way small businesses pay taxes. When discussing abortion restrictions, she often describes how painful it must be for a patient to wait in line at TSA while flying out of the state to get reproductive care. She puts a tremendous amount of capital on having people make sure they've really thought through the everyday life and experience of Americans. I would be willing to put every last penny I've got on not a single bit of that fucking happen, but that's neither here nor there. Harris has put abortion at the center of her campaign with a promise to suspend the filibuster to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade. She would extend Biden's initiatives on infrastructure, climate, and jobs, while adding new ones to build more affordable housing, invest in small businesses, and cut taxes on working families. All these are things that they could have done literally at any point over the last 3 years and have chosen not to. Why is it that now this is suddenly something that seems like a good idea? On October 8th, she proposed a new Medicare benefit to help families pay for home health aides for seniors and the disabled. To finance all this, she proposes increasing the long-term capital gains tax on people who make more than $1 million a year and restoring the 28% corporate tax rate that existed under previous Democratic and Republican presidents. Let me tell you, raising taxes on rich people is always the solution. It always works out. It's not like the legal system is built to allow them to completely avoid that in every fucking way possible. It's 100% of the time. It works. Totally. Definitely. And this isn't even like a 60% of the time it works every time. Like, yeah, that's definitely a strong plan. Biden's domestic agenda was partly a product of the crisis he inherited, rebuilding from the pandemic and revitalizing America's manufacturing section. Harris, who had a front row seat as voters struggled with inflation, created political headaches for the administration. Promises to curb high prices on everything from groceries to healthcare. The goal is to lower your costs by cutting your taxes, to lower housing costs, to lower pharmaceutical costs, says served as director of the Economic Council under Biden and is now one of Harris's top economic advisors. Democrats cutting taxes. That will never fucking happen ever. Opponents tell a different story. Harris's agenda is the Biden administration agenda light, says Douglas Holtz-Eakin, president of the American Action Forum, a center-right think tank in Washington, and the former senior economic advisor for Republican John McCain's 2008 campaign. Holtz-Eakin considers Harris's plan to be profoundly anti-growth because of their reliance on government programs. Yet he thinks Trump's proposed tariffs would be equally bad. Neither are good for the economy, he says. By many measures, the economy has thrived under the Biden-Harris administration, with 16 million new jobs created, which has been debunked. That's a bullshit number. Every jobs report has been dropped down consistently over the last 3 years. Those weren't jobs created at all. Unemployment hovering around 4%. This has also been debunked. Unemployment is between 5 and 6%. Some even reporting higher than that. Real unemployment, that is, like maybe 4% if you're looking at the really skewed way that they measure it, but it's not realistic. And manufacturing jobs are at a 10-year high, according to the Bureau for Labor Statistics. GDP growth is around 3% this year, and the stock market keeps hitting all-time highs. But even if the data is good, the economic vibes are bad. Housing costs in particular have skyrocketed over the past decade, which is why Harris has put housing affordability at the heart of her economic agenda. GDP growth around 3% is not good, and the stock market hitting all-time highs does not have anything to do with the economy. These are things that it doesn't take a fucking rocket scientist to understand, but I'm not going into great depth with it right now, trying to get through the article. In addition to that proposal for the first-time home buyers, which could be whittled down to pass a divided Congress, she's proposing a significant expansion of the low-income housing tax credit, a popular and long-standing bipartisan initiative that incentivizes developers to build more affordable rentals. She's also proposing a tax cut designed to encourage more homes to be built for the first-time buyers and a $40 billion innovation fund. Housing experts say no other presidential candidate in recent memory has proposed such a detailed plan. For years, housing affordability was a silent crisis, says Dennis Shea, who leads the housing program at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Now it's a front-burner issue. Harris has also proposed several ways to ease burdens on small businesses, which provide nearly half of American jobs. Helping small businesses was part of her White House portfolio, and even conservative critics acknowledge she's been attentive to the issue. The addition of offering a $50,000 tax deduction to help new small businesses offset startup costs. She proposes to ease permitting and automate processes, with the goal of 25 million new startup applications in her first term. If you ask small businesses what they don't like, they will always say it's really hard to get permits and hard to get this licensing. The paperwork has gotten to be too much, says Karen Mills, who ran the Small Business Administration under President Obama. It's the first time I've heard someone listen to that. We're just ignoring the entire 4 years of the Trump presidency? Okay, yeah, naturally. Some economists are skeptical of Harris's tax proposals. In the aggregate, all these provisions would have a negative impact on economic growth, says Alex Durant, an economist at the Tax Foundation, a center-right research institute. But even many conservatives doubt Trump would be much better for the economy, citing his tariffs and immigration plans. Goldman Sachs announced in September that they estimate a stronger economy and more job growth under a Harris presidency than a second Trump term. Modeling by the Wharton School and the University of Pennsylvania forecast that Trump's plan would increase the deficit 5 times as much as Harris's would. Taken together, Harris's economic plans are good for lower and middle income Americans and small businesses and tough on high net worth households and corporations, says Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's, who has predicted a Harris victory. Her proposals are not going to change the growth rates of the economy in a meaningful way, Zandi adds, but it does change who benefits the most from that and what's going to be low and middle income households. Biden's successors will have to grapple with multiple foreign policy crises now gripping the White House. The next commander-in-chief will have to deal with wars in Europe and the Middle East and competition with China. Harris has deliberately not staked out new foreign policy positions, aides say, since she's still the current vice president. And still, there are subtle but important differences between their approaches. While Biden views the world as a contest between democracy and authoritarianism, Harris, a former prosecutor, sees it through the prism of rules and norms, a fight between those who uphold the rules-based order and those who undermine it. As a Californian who once represented Silicon Valley, she sees technology as a crucial part of America's global leadership and would put it at the center of her foreign policy. She also tends to talk more about the global South than Biden does. One of Harris's first diplomatic assignments was to stem the flow of migrants arriving in the U.S. by addressing the economic and security conditions in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. In an effort to improve life in the region, Harris helped launch a public-private partnership that drove big companies to invest more than $5 billion there. Such long-term economic strategies haven't succeeded in the past, and illegal crossings still spiked under Biden. Harris, like her boss, has recently toughened her position on border security. She now talks about her experience as the attorney general of a border state prosecuting transnational cartels and drug smugglers. She supported the bipartisan immigration bill that would have hired 1,500 new Border Patrol agents, improved the asylum process. It didn't improve the asylum process. It took the asylum process and passed it off to a different jurisdiction. It didn't improve anything. It just kicked the can down the road. And would have paid for new fentanyl inspection machines. Though she is the daughter of immigrants, Harris is not as sympathetic to some of the immigration advocacy, says Doris Messner, a senior fellow at the Migration Policy Institute, a nonpartisan think tank. She's sympathetic to immigrants, but she's also going to be strong on the fact that there needs to be control and discipline and consistency to the way that we do it. And yet she did nothing about any of that in her time as the border czar. On the spreading war in the Middle East, Harris has condemned the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th, promoted Israel's right to defend itself, and called for a ceasefire with the return of the hostages. Some supporters glean signs of greater sympathy for civilians in Gaza, even if the distinctions are subtle and rhetorical. What I sense from her is that she will be less accommodating of Israel even than Biden was, says Michael Allen, who served on President George W. Bush's National Security Council. She's more progressive than Biden is, so I think she'd be more inclined to the point of view that the Israelis, especially Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have prosecuted the war too aggressively. A Harris aide said in a statement that she has a lifelong and unwavering commitment to the security of Israel, and added that she shares Biden's larger goals of de-escalation, a hostage deal, and a ceasefire. Harris has not given an address focused solely on foreign policy, and she is viewed mostly as a supporting character in the Biden administration's overseas dramas. I don't think anybody with a straight face could really say that she's considered a foreign policy powerhouse, says Elbridge Colby, a national security expert who served in the Trump Pentagon and argues for a tougher approach on China. Her closest foreign policy advisor, Philip Gordon, has served Democratic presidents since Bill Clinton, and he and his aides are more likely to stay the course than seek a remake American strategy. A Harris presidency, says Colby, would mean a generation younger, more progressive version of the current foreign policy. To Republicans' dismay, Harris' careful policy rollout appears to be working. Where does this appear to be working? When she entered the race, Trump had a decisive lead on many of the issues voters say they consider most important: immigration, the economy, the cost of living. Polls show Harris beginning to erase this edge. Harris is virtually tied with Trump on who voters trust to handle the economy, and only narrowly trails him on immigration, according to a September AP poll. She continues to lead by broad margins on health care, abortion rights, and climate change. Two recent polls found that more Americans see Harris as the candidate representing change, whether it's change from Biden or change from Trump. Harris supporters have seized that mantle and chant at her rallies, "We're not going back." Still, 65% of registered voters say the country is on the wrong track, which is a tough number for the party in power. That sour mood presents Harris with a delicate challenge, boasting about the Biden administration's accomplishments on infrastructure, insulin, and green jobs, while distancing herself from both her predecessor and her old policy platform. She has a record of saying things that she's now trying to pivot from, says Ted Gayer, president of Niskanen Center, a nonpartisan think tank. I can look at that and it can cause suspicion. Or I could look at that and be happy for the pivot. I'm happy for the pivot. Of course you are, Gayer Ted. Aides argue that her current platform is rooted in political reality. She is guided by pragmatism, not ideology, says Deese, a top economic advisor. That doesn't mean we can't set big goals, but it means we need to be highly practical and constantly ask ourselves the question, is this working? And if it's not, try something else. As Harris left her economic policy speech at Carnegie Mellon, students lined up along the street, waiting silently for her motorcade. As the line of black cars passed the crowd, Harris appeared in the window, waving through the glass, her face framed by the window like a living postage stamp. The crowd began to cheer, and the girl standing next to me began to cry. Her name was Nomi Barbagli, an 18-year-old with long curly hair. I asked Barbagli if there was a particular policy proposal of Harris's that excited her. Honestly, not that much, she said. She brings a lot of hope and optimism, and I know what I don't like about Donald Trump. That is the tagline for every Kamala Harris voter. Is there anything about her policies that excites you? Honestly, no. I just don't like Donald Trump. That's it. That's all you need to know. Actually, I think I probably am going to read the Trump article tomorrow. From having skimmed and looked at the transcript of the interview, I have a pretty good idea how they're going to paint Trump in the article about what he would be like as president. And I'm going to be willing to bet that it's not anywhere near as rosy and, rainbows and sunshine and lollipops as what the Kamala Harris article here was. The fact that she declined multiple requests for an interview for this, and Time Magazine is going to be friendly to her. They're going to be super friendly. The article they wrote was super friendly. There was no lose in doing the interview, and she still didn't do it. But there's a double standard. Yeah, the double standard is not what the original retard Eugene Robinson from the Washington Post seemed to think it was. It actually goes the complete opposite direction. But again, that's why Bezos wrote the article he did, because people see shit like that and understand that the media cannot be trusted. And this is the kind of shit that they do. Talk about a double standard. Whew. Anyway, that'll do it for today. I will come back tomorrow and I'll read the Trump piece on what Trump would be like as president this time around from Time Magazine. So yeah, we'll do that tomorrow sometime. And that's about all I got. In the meantime, hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow.